Hello and welcome to the Diaspora today, where we focus on diaspora for development in Africa and engagement with Africans in the diaspora. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. On the show this week, we host the 19th Ghanaian Ambassador to the United States, His Excellency Ambassador Dr. Barfuor Adjei-Barwuah, a dedicated public servant and distinguished statesman. Send us your view on diaspora issues. You are watching the Diaspora Today show. I am Abdul Rashid Abu Bakr. Thank you for making time out for the Diaspora Today show. His Excellency Dr. Barfuor Adjei-Barwuah, the Ambassador.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the Ghanaians' growing economic prosperity and political stability, further positioned Ghana as a regional power in West Africa. And Ghana is one of the countries that signed the AU's Continental Free Trade Agreement. What do you think about the position of Ghana?
Well, geographically in the West African sub-region, we have a certain centrality, looking at the distribution of the countries in that corner of Africa. So that geographic position alone gives us a certain kind of impetus to try and lead the sub-region. But then also politically, in historical terms, we were the first to gain independence. We have tried very hard to lead a lot of the developments in Africa politically. And also economically, we have always tried to be more or less together for ourselves and also for the West African sub-region. So if we are seen to be a regional power, maybe the definition is accepted. And it is therefore incumbent on us as a country to ensure that the rest of the West African sub-region actually stays in with us, for us to have a common front, a common policy, a common objective to develop, the sub-region and extend it to the rest of the continent.
Ambassador, 11 countries are yet to sign the AU's Continental Free Trade Agreement. What is your take on this?
Well, I believe every country reserves a certain right to look at the details of the agreement and then sign. But I do believe that for all the countries on the continent, if only 11 are the standouts, I suspect that in course of time they will subscribe to it. And mind you, even on the very elementary level, you may realize that especially in sub-Saharan Africa, for all those countries in there, nobody ever objects to being called an African. So there is that commonality of interest. There is that common thread which says that whatever the majority probably will subscribe to, the rest, will catch up because of the fact that we see a certain kind of common base for all of us. So I do believe that those who haven't signed does not indicate that they are objecting to the arrangements. I guess every country has peculiarities, and therefore they will need to examine the terms of the agreement as it suits them as individual countries. I'm sure in the final analysis, they will come into the fold.
And sign.
And sign, yeah.
For the first time in the history of Africa, the AU was able to bring African leaders to the table and sign this agreement. Also, we have the African here agreement. Do you think this is a way forward for African economy, integration into the global economy?
Well, it has to be a way forward, because somewhere along the line, part of the African problem has been with respect to the fact that we don't have any significant inter-African trade. And because we trade with countries that initially probably controlled most of us politically, we have never had the advantage of seeking our interest. In fact, when people talk about the rules of international trade, the norms of international arrangements and such, when these rules and norms were being set, we were never at the table. So now, coming together, we would be able to establish our common interest and basically argue for those common interests. So it certainly is a way forward, if only we are going to stick together. Because we have had times when we have even managed to parcel some kinds of mutually acceptable terms between us. But then we find other people sort of gnawing under these agreements and then eventually sort of having a difficulty holding the line together. But I'm very confident that this time Africa will see to protecting African interest and stick to the agreements as we have them. Of course, periodically we may need to review some of the terms. That one is natural. But I expect that in general terms, we are obviously going to be able to uphold the terms and the principles contained in the agreement that has been signed.
So tell me, is Ghana open for business?
We are more than open for business. Our president, for instance, has said that he is in a hurry to improve on the economy, in a hurry to improve on people's socio-economic situation, in a hurry to ensure that the economy, as it were, moves up and up. And because of that, and topping that, is the fact that the president says we would want Ghana to develop without aid. So if we are going to develop without aid, then obviously where we are going to be hitting is a relationship between Ghana and private enterprise. And as long as the understandings between Ghana and private capital are fair, obviously we are going to make it possible for anybody who comes to us to invest in our neighborhood to have a fair return on a fair investment. Obviously, what we are going to try to control is the kind of shyster investors who normally come basically to rape a country and go away. But this time, we just want to make sure that the arrangements are fair, the rules are fair, the terms are reasonable, and therefore either side would respect whatever the parameters are. So we are open for business. Everybody is welcome to come and invest with us. But the intentions ought to be correct, noble, economically defensible, and socially acceptable.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Sure.
What are the plans that the government have in place to ensure that investors' investment are protected in Ghana?
Well, at the moment, Ghanaian laws are particularly good when it comes to protecting the individual's investment. For instance, we have laws that say that one, you can export your profits without any encumbrances at all. Two, the investment laws, in fact, the company laws ensure that one's investment cannot be appropriated simply because the person happens not to be a Ghanaian. And then three, because we will continuously want to attract investors, we also make sure that those who are already in are comfortable, are very respectful on either side insofar as the laws and the regulations are concerned. And the courts are always open for anybody who has an umbrage to go to the courts for a determination to be made. So as far as investor interests are concerned, we make sure that we don't leave anybody hanging anywhere to dry. We will and we do protect investors.
Ambassador, in what ways can Africa leverage the power of Africans in the diaspora towards economic development?
Well, I do believe that Africans in the diaspora, even if they feel excessively comfortable wherever they are, even if they have developed a mentality that they are sort of no longer Africans, would always recognize that the rest of the globe would always see them as Africans. And therefore, whilst concentrating on where they are, they would always have to have a certain backdrop on where they came from. We have it in the language that there is no comfort watching your house burn whilst you sit on somebody's front porch. Because after the house is burned down, the owner of the front porch may well come and ask you, when are you going home? Knowing very well that there's no home to go to. And besides, in contemporary terms, if one is not careful or one is not lucky, or if there is a certain kind of excessive overturn of events, maybe somebody will come and ask us, or somebody is going to tell us, the way Caesar Augustus told everybody, go to your hometown and be counted. So we all have to go home and be counted. The chances then are that after you've been counted, and you would want to go back to where you used to be or what have you, somebody might tell you that, oh, the rules have changed, there is a wall, and therefore you cannot even climb over. So Africans in the diaspora would always have to recognize the fact that they have roots somewhere, and they need to protect the roots. And besides, Africa is their reference point. Africa is their root. Africa is their home. And therefore, whichever way they look at it, it is incumbent on each of us to make a contribution towards the development of Africa.
A lot of my fellow Africans in the diaspora believe that the doors have been shut on them. How do you open the door, Ambassador?
I'm not too sure as to how they interpret the door being opened on them, being closed on them. The fact of the matter is, some of them, wherever they are, cultures are different, standards are different, the way of doing things are different. And therefore, when they go back, to Africa, they transport with themselves, they transport what is it that they have been experienced over the years to the environment that they've entered, in Africa. The fact of the matter is, the parameters are different. And therefore, if somebody, for instance, goes into any of the African capitals, and what they expect is that, down the line you walk into some shop and you can buy anything from a Mercedes-Benz to a gun. We don't have that kind of thing in Africa, because maybe the method of trade is different. And you see, where you are transposing different standards, you create difficulties for yourself by not being mindful of the changes in the general environment that you are in. If anybody seriously argued that the door is shut on them in Africa, I will find it very odd, because if anything at all, Africa as a general area, and most African countries, are even so very welcoming to foreigners that I can't see how they cannot be welcoming to their own kind. So I don't buy that argument, except that maybe some people go with attitudes which are probably unacceptable in the African context. You can't take a man out of the country, but you can't take the country out of the man. So somewhere inside all of us, there is always going to be a certain kind of attachment, a certain kind of loyalty to the area where your roots are. And I think maybe part of the difficulty that we have had as Africans relate to the fact that sometimes a good number of us forget that home is where your heart is, and home is where you go, and they have to take you in. And for the average African, no matter where he or she comes from, in Africa, they will take you in, which doesn't happen in the other parts of the world, which are not necessarily African. So yes, it is true that there is a certain kind of seepage of the African Jews in every African. And that is what ought to keep them going. And that is what should keep Africa on their minds. And that is what should keep them always looking at what is it that their contribution could be insofar as the development of the continent is concerned.
What advice do you have for Ghanaians in the diaspora?
Well, there is nobody who is going to develop Ghana for Ghanaians but the Ghanaians themselves. And those in the diaspora ought to consider it their duty. They ought to consider it part of their responsibility to make a contribution towards the development of the country. And that contribution may well come in terms of making some kind of effort to support some of the activities going on in the country. And in fact, making an effort to invest in the country, insofar as the whole question of developmental projects are concerned. At the moment, I'm looking to setting up a private equity fund into which Ghanaians could invest. Now, with that kind of investment, we can use that money to develop the country, and at the same time, those who put their money in will be making a profit. In the same way that even those who are here and would want to engage in economic activity in the States could also tap into that kind of fund to develop whatever area of activity they would want to develop. So insofar as Ghanaians are concerned, I would want them to constantly recognize the fact that they are Ghanaians and they owe it to themselves and to their country to support their country to develop. They cannot, as it were, sit by somewhere and basically either moan because they don't see the country moving as it should, and they also have to take an interest in making contributions, whether it's mental or what have you, towards a certain package of effort to develop the country. If the country is good, you yourself, you will be good and you will feel good, because somewhere inside each one of us, there's a certain twinge of pride that you get because you can see your country flying. And Ghana is bound to fly because we are probably one of the very few countries on this planet that have no reason to be poor. We have just managed not to manage well. But this time we are determined to manage well. And all the Ghanaians in the diaspora should make it their business to make a contribution to that change in attitude, so that when the flower blooms, each one of us can stand by, look at the flowers, and tell themselves that I was there when we were planting it.
To other Africans in the diaspora?
The Africans in the diaspora, insofar as their individual countries are concerned, can also have the same attitude. But then also, they ought to be able to come together somehow because if there is that level of unity, they can control resources. They can help direct those countries that need direction. And besides, even within the countries where they live, they ought to come together, because the numbers and how the numbers are glued generate economic power, generates political power. Because there is absolutely, I find it difficult, for instance, to understand why in certain cities you would have about 30,000 people who are purely African, but they don't even hold a position as a dog catcher in the council. And 30,000 in anybody's calculation is a big number, politically very significant. And besides all that, even if you had one person in a legislature, that one person constitutes an effective lone voice, and therefore the larger community could benefit by having that lone voice in a legislature. I think Africans generally need to pull together so that their intrinsic interest could also be protected. I know, for instance, that there are lots of Africans who are very significant in terms of numbers and expertise in certain areas of economic activity and whatnot. They don't control any of those. But then if you look at some of the other peoples in a country like this, you go into certain areas of the economy, and you can bet your last dollar that it will be significantly influenced by people from that background. The Africans haven't done that, and I think they better start doing that, because that is what gives them a certain feel that even though they are not, say, native born, they certainly have a certain kind of clout because they have made more than significant contributions to the development of this country.
It's time for you, my viewers from all across the world, to wake up and say to yourself, I will take ownership of Africa. Once again, thank you, His Excellency Dr. Adjei-Barwuah. I really appreciate your time, and we'll continue to engage with you on issues of concern to Africa and Ghana as a regional power in West Africa, and other pressing issues that are affecting Africans in the diaspora and from all over the world. Thank you so much, my viewers from around the world. Till we catch again, my name is Abdul Rashid Abubakar. Have a wonderful day.